Good evening and welcome to the Obscura Institute. The lamps are lit, the archive is open, and tonight we draw a single file down from the shelves. File 2, the Hessdalen Lights. Settle in, make yourself comfortable, and let us begin. It is an evening in December 1981, and somewhere in the valley a woman stands at her kitchen window with a cup of something warm in her hands. Outside, the snow holds what little light there is. She is not looking for anything in particular, only resting her eyes on the dark while the kettle cools. When a light slides into view above the hills, no sound. It simply hangs there, over the river and the forested slopes, the way a lamp would hang if someone had thought to hang a lamp in the sky. Hessdalen is a narrow valley in central Norway, in the municipality of Holtålen, about 120 kilometers south of the city of Trondheim. It runs for some 15 kilometers between forested hills, with a river along its floor. Only around 150 people live there. There are no big towns close enough to wash out the sky, so on a clear night, the dark is very complete. The kind of dark where you can see your own breath, but not your own hand. In the late autumn of 1981, the people who lived in that dark began to notice something overhead. A couple named Arge and Rut Mo described seeing what they called a burning fireball in the evening sky. They were not the only ones. Within weeks, the reports were coming in steadily, and they did not come from the sort of people easy to wave away. Farmers, a school teacher, engineers, people who had spent their whole lives under that particular patch of sky and knew exactly what the moon looked like behind cloud, what a car's headlights did against the snow, what an aeroplane sounded like passing high and late. This was none of those things. At the height of it, in the stretch between December 1981 and the middle of 1984, the valley was reporting these lights 15 to 20 times a week. This was not a rare event glimpsed once and argued over for a generation. It was something happening again and again on an ordinary Tuesday, witnessed by sober people standing in the cold, who then went home and wrote down what they had seen. What they described was hard to file away. Witnesses reported lights that moved without any sound at all. Lights that, they said, hung in the air, perfectly still, for minutes at a time, and then were simply gone. Some of them, people said, drifted low down near the valley floor, close enough that a person could have walked toward one. The word the locals kept reaching for was not strange, but familiar. By 1982, the lights were almost a fixture, the way weather is a fixture. Tourists began driving up to stand in the snow and wait for them. And there is one more thing. Unusual lights had reportedly been seen around this region long before 1981. Accounts go back at least to the 1930s. So whatever woke in the valley that winter, it may not have been new at all. It may only have become impossible to ignore. If you gather the descriptions together, and many people did carefully over years, a fairly consistent picture forms. That consistency is the first thing that makes Hessdalen difficult to dismiss. The lights were usually bright white or yellow or red. They appeared above the horizon and, oddly, sometimes below it, down against the dark mass of the hills, which already rules out anything you might explain as a star or a planet. In size, they ranged enormously. Some were small, perhaps half a meter across. Others were reported as large as 30 meters, the length of a row of houses, glowing and hanging in the air. The behavior witnesses described is where the accounts turn genuinely odd. Sometimes, they said, a light would sit almost motionless, swaying gently back and forth as if suspended on a thread. Sometimes it would hover dead still, and then, with no build-up, it would move, and move fast. Witnesses described single balls of light that split apart into several smaller ones. They described beams that swept across the valley floor like something searching. They described colors shifting through the spectrum, red to green to white, within a single sighting. The duration was just as unpredictable. A light might last a few seconds and vanish, or it might stay for well over an hour, drifting and pulsing while people stood and watched it the way you'd watch a fire. One figure gets quoted again and again. When instruments were later trained on the lights, the fastest speed recorded was given as 30,000 kilometers an hour. It is a startling number, though a slippery one. The research project reported it, but it was never a settled, peer-reviewed measurement of a solid object moving through air. Estimating the speed of a glowing light at an unknown distance is genuinely difficult. Distance and size and speed all tangle together. Still, it matched what the witnesses had been saying all along. These things appeared to accelerate in ways that, if you imagine them as physical craft, make no sense. No sound, no sonic boom, no gradual gathering of pace. Stillness, and then gone. The crucial thing about all this, the reason it became a scientific question rather than a folk tale, is the repetition. A single dramatic sighting can be a misremembered aircraft or a trick of tired eyes. But something that shows up 15 times a week in roughly the same place, with roughly the same range of behaviors, is no longer just a story. It is a pattern, and a pattern can be pointed at with a camera. Before anyone brought instruments up the valley road, people reached, sensibly, for ordinary explanations. That is exactly what you should do. Most mysteries are mundane things seen at a bad angle. So, the early skeptics worked through the usual list. Aircraft first. Hessdalen is not far from airspace used by Norwegian and Allied forces, and military jets and exercises are a reasonable thing to suspect. But the light's reported movement didn't fit flight paths. Aircraft travel in fairly predictable lines. They make noise. They carry navigation lights in known patterns. By the witness accounts, these lights did not. They hung motionless, a few meters above a frozen river, split in two, and then accelerated sideways in silence. Ball lightning, next. This is a real and still mysterious phenomenon in its own right. Glowing spheres reported during thunderstorms, usually lasting only seconds. For a while, it seemed a tidy fit. But ball lightning is tied to thunderstorm conditions, and many of the Hessdalen sightings happened on cold, clear, calm winter nights when there was simply no storm to produce it. And ball lightning is fleeting. The Hessdalen lights, witnesses said, could last an hour. It was the wrong fit. Then the optical explanations. Reflections off ice crystals in the air. Headlights bouncing off something. Temperature inversions bending distant light. These can produce all sorts of convincing illusions, and in the right valley, they'd be worth taking seriously. But investigators kept running into the same wall. The lights were reported below the horizon, against the hillsides. You cannot easily explain a reflection that sits lower than the thing supposedly being reflected. They appeared when conditions weren't right for the illusions proposed. And they were watched, repeatedly, by people who knew that valley's every distant farm light and road by heart. None of the ordinary answers was absurd. Each could explain some sightings. But none could explain all of them, and none could explain the most consistent reports. The silence, the hovering, the sudden speed, the lights down low among the trees. The conventional explanations didn't so much fail as fall short. They left a residue, And that residue was what drew the scientists in. This is the turn that makes Hessdalen unusual among unexplained things. Most mysteries never get a sustained, equipped, repeatable investigation. They happen once, the witnesses scatter, and all that remains is testimony. Hessdalen got the opposite. Because the lights kept coming back, people could plan to be there with the right tools and wait. The first organized effort began in 1983 under the name Project Hessdalen, started by the civilian UFO research groups in Norway and Sweden, who ran field investigations through the valley between 1983 and 1985. In the winter of 1984, the lights were studied for the first time with proper instruments, magnetometers to detect changes in the magnetic field, radiometers, and radar. Leading that work was a Norwegian engineer named Erling Strand, whose name stays attached to the project for decades after. This was not a fringe campaign carried out in the dark with hope and a Polaroid. Over the years, it drew in serious institutions, the Norwegian Defence Research Establishment and Østfold University College in Norway among them, later joined by international collaborators including the Italian National Research Council, under a research program called EMBLA that brought established scientists and students together in the valley. And then came the thing that makes Hessdalen quietly one of the longest-running systematic studies of an unexplained natural phenomenon anywhere. On the 7th of August 1998, the project switched on a permanent automatic measurement station in the valley. The instruments sit inside a blue shipping container, and so everyone just calls it the blue box. Inside are a magnetometer and a set of television cameras, 2 black and white, 1 color, watching the sky and the valley floor, recording night after night, year after year, waiting for the lights to return so that a machine, and not just a person, is there to see them. Think about what that means. Most of the time, the blue box records nothing but the slow turn of the stars and the weather coming over the hills. It is patient in a way a human observer can't be. It does not get cold or bored or suggestible. It waits, and every so often, it catches something. The early spectral data, light, split into its component colors, which tells you what a glowing thing is made of, pointed toward plasma. Plasma is the 4th state of matter, gas heated or charged until its atoms come apart into a glowing, electrically active soup. It is what the sun is made of, and what you see in a lightning bolt or a neon tube. That was a real result. It suggested the lights were luminous in their own right, generating their own light rather than reflecting it. But knowing it was plasma only sharpened the real question, which was where the energy to make and sustain that plasma was coming from, night after night, in a cold, quiet valley. Glowing gas, then. Lit by what? So what, across more than 2 decades of patient recording, did the machines actually capture? The instruments confirmed, broadly, what the witnesses had been describing. The cameras caught lights that brightened and dimmed in slow pulses. They caught sudden changes of direction and apparent accelerations of the kind people had reported from the start, which is significant because a camera does not get excited and misremember. Radar returns and magnetometer readings suggested that, on some occasions, the appearance of a light coincided with real disturbances in the local environment, not just an image on a lens. The spectrometers, again, kept pointing at plasma, ionized gas, hot and electrically charged, and there was one finding that genuinely surprised the researchers. Using night vision equipment sensitive to infrared, the heat end of the spectrum, they found that the phenomenon could produce a very strong infrared signature even when it was faint or completely invisible to the naked eye. In other words, Sometimes there was something there, radiating energy, that a person standing in the valley would never have seen at all. Heat where the eye saw nothing. When the recorded light was analyzed for its chemical fingerprint, the researchers reported finding signatures of common elements, hydrogen, oxygen, and, more curiously, traces of metals including titanium. Some suggested this had to do with the unusual minerals in the valley's rock, including a rare element called scandium, found there in notable deposits. In 2007, a researcher announced that scandium had been found among the elements tied to the valley's rock. It was a real and interesting detail. But identifying scandium, or titanium, or anything else in the glow tells you something about what might be burning. It says little about why it ignites, or how it holds together as a hovering ball, or where the power comes from to send it across the sky and hold it still. Knowing an ingredient is not the same as knowing the recipe. So the data did real work. It moved Hessdalen out of the territory of pure anecdote. It confirmed that something physical, luminous, and energetic is genuinely happening in that valley. It ruled some things firmly in: plasma, infrared, real magnetic effects, and quietly set others aside. But it did not deliver a mechanism. It narrowed the field of possibilities without ever closing the gap. There is still, in the careful words of the research, no definitive, self-consistent, quantitative theory that accounts for all the observed features of the lights. The instruments brought the mystery into sharper focus. They did not dissolve it. What you are left with is a small number of serious explanations, none of which has won, and several of which may turn out to be partly right at the same time. They share a common thread. Each looks not to the sky, but to the ground, to the particular, unusual geology of this one valley. The first centers on radon. Radon is a naturally radioactive gas that seeps up out of certain rocks, and the Hessdalen Valley has one of the highest concentrations of it anywhere in Europe. A theory published in 2010 in a Journal of Atmospheric and Solar Science proposed that as radon decays in the air, the particles it throws off could ionize the dust and gas around them, charging it, in other words, and that under the right conditions, this could build into a glowing, self-organizing cluster of charged dust within a plasma. A glowing ball born from the breath of the rock itself. A second idea looks to the dust more directly, suggesting some incompletely understood combustion of fine airborne particles, dust stirred up from old mining activity in the area, which would tie in with those metal traces, the titanium and the rest, found in the light. A third draws on what is called the piezoelectric effect. Certain crystals, quartz among them, generate an electric charge when they are squeezed or stressed. The rock under Hessdalen is rich in quartz. The valley sits in a geologically active region, and when crystalline rock is put under mechanical strain, by small movements in the earth, by tectonic stress, those quartz crystals can release electric charge. In enough quantity, the theory goes, that charge could build strong local electric fields, fields powerful enough to ionize the surrounding air and set dust particles glowing. The valley's abundance of quartz, along with copper and iron, would help such electricity move freely. Pressure turning into light. And a fourth, perhaps the most evocative, comes from the Italian researcher Jada Monari, who has spent time studying the valley. He noticed something about its structure. Hessdalen is, in effect, split between two mountain ranges of different mineral character, one rich in copper, the other in iron and zinc. Monari suggested that the valley might behave like an enormous natural battery. Different metals in the ground, acidic groundwater seeping between them, and tiny strains from the shifting earth could together generate an electrical current. And from that current, floating, self-contained balls of plasma, something cousin to ball lightning but born of the rock rather than the storm. The whole valley, working like a battery. Put these together and a shape begins to appear, even if no one can quite hold it yet. A valley with rare and varied minerals. Quartz that turns pressure into electricity. Two facing ranges of different metals. Radon rising from below. Cold, clear, still air above. This specific combination of ingredients, found together in this one quiet place, could brew something almost nowhere else on Earth can. But no one has yet built the full chain of cause and effect. Measured it, modeled it, and shown that it produces exactly the lights people see, with their speed and silence and hour-long patience. The pieces are on the table. The mechanism that joins them is not. Meanwhile, the lights have not stopped. They have grown rarer, from those 15 or 20 sightings a week in the early 80s down to perhaps 20 in a whole year now. But they still come, and the blue box still waits for them as it has since 1998, its cameras open to the dark. The project around it has kept going too, running summer science camps in the valley for young students since 2002, holding workshops and, in 2023, formally becoming a non-profit organization so that the watch can continue. That is the unusual state of Hessdalen. People looked as hard as they could. They brought magnetometers and spectrometers and radar and a permanent station and decades of patience. And what they found was that the lights are real, measured, recorded, photographed, genuinely there. And that, after all of it, no one can yet say what they are. In summer, the nights barely darken at all, and the lights rarely come. The valley turns green, the river runs loud with meltwater, and the blue box watches a bright, quiet sky where there is usually nothing to see. The lights belong to the long, dark months, and when those months come round again, the cameras will be open, still waiting. And that is where we leave File 2 for tonight. Thank you for spending this quiet hour in the archive. The lamps will stay lit, and the Institute will be here whenever you wish to return. Until then, rest well.